So this week's podcast was all about how to lose ladder-like language. And I once read this brilliant quote from a philosopher where called Ludwig Wittgenstein, where he says, the words we use frame how we see the world. And I do think our language in organisations matters. And that's why we did our podcast episode this week. But I actually wanted to start us today by encouraging us to zoom out beyond the words that we use. We'll come back to words in a second. But what are all of the things that you spot and see in your organisation, but also just in the world of work, that you think anchor us back to ladders and staircases? What are some of the structures, systems? Maybe it is some of the things that we talked about in the podcast this week. But what are some of the things that keep us going back to thinking of career ladders? I was testing myself on this as well this morning to see what else I came up with. Zoe, you and me came up with the first one exactly the same. So I went to org charts. Yeah, seeing where you sit on an organizational chart does get you back a bit to, okay, well, where am I on that chart? And am I more important the further up that chart I go? Job grades, yeah. So grades. And also, I don't know if anybody said it yet, but ratings. I don't know if any of you, I always had that. I had both grades and ratings for a long time. So ratings, if it's not something you've ever experienced, are where companies will literally say to you, oh, you're a ... exceeds expectations, meet expectations. That was definitely one of the companies that I was in. Can't remember which one. And so again, you were sort of labelled and put into a box. Most organisations are slowly but surely getting rid of ratings. Grades, I think, are still around in lots of organisations. Yeah, we've got titles. Yeah, progression plans. So it's interesting. We like progression, but then we attach it to a plan. And plans sort of suggest, okay, well, this is what's going to happen in this order. Talent management strategies. Yeah, pay scale. Good suggestion there from Sam. I do think money. We're going to talk a bit about money in the live podcast we're doing in October, because we've got a great guest joining us, a guy called Peter, who I've seen speak before. And I think we probably need to talk about money a little bit more in Squiggly Careers and how they work and how we make sure that money isn't a barrier to success. Yeah, pay scale for sure. So yeah, people were saying that. Grades, yeah, where decisions are made. Yeah, that's interesting, Katie. Do you know, I didn't get to that, but I like that one. So yeah, decision making. So if all of your decisions in your organizations are made here, you're sort of, I guess it's power structures, isn't it? It's where the power sits in your organization. So therefore, do you then go back to, oh, well, I have to climb the ladder if I want to be in a position of influence and impact? Yeah, Andrew, you've got career pathways, which basically shows the next step to the next grade. Yeah, we get asked about that quite a lot. And it's not something we do loads of work on at the moment. Kind of career pathways, how to do those in a different way. It's not an area we're sort of specialists in, but it's one I'm very interested in. Oh, just a quick reminder to go on mute if you don't mind.
I'm at home.
Oh, one sec. There we go. I'll just mute that person. So pathways, just so that I think people do need frameworks. We've talked about this before. When we talk to people about exploring progression possibilities, being really curious about their careers, it's often quite difficult in organizations. Even if we've given people some ways you might do that, people still sometimes need to see the art of the possible. So, and I understand that. I think that, that gives people options. It helps people to sort of think about who they might go and talk to, how they might go and explore. But how do you do that so that you don't just create pathways for people to follow? Fund structures. Yeah, Joe, you'll say ratings as well. You get client evaluations, old-fashioned hierarchies where decisions are made. Oh, yeah, Anna, the old force distribution curve. Oh, it brings back so many memories. So, yeah, we used to have that where you'd have a curve that looked like this for people who've not had it before. And we used to get told as a leadership team, okay, you need to have a certain amount of people here, certain amount of people here, certain amount of people here, regardless of how good your team were. So you might have had an exceptionally high performing team and had this many people who were sort of high performing, but you had what was called a force distribution curve. Again, I think that's going slowly but surely. Certainly most organizations that we work with if they have had them, they are moving away from them, something that feels more kind of fluid and flexible, which is good news. And your monthly or annual awards, exec teams, career. Oh, that's interesting, Laura. Most senior people seem obsessed with HR people developing career ladders for employees, constantly dodging requests. That's interesting. So maybe we do need to kind of think a bit about this one a little bit more. So if that's what senior people are asking for, why are they asking for it? Perhaps because they're seeing it in employee surveys. People are saying, I need more support with where my career could take me here in ... company. So rather than sort of going, well, we just, we don't want to do that thing of kind of getting, or we're just not going to do it because it feels too ladder-like, going, well, what would be better because? What would feel like a really good alternative? It's a bit like when we've looked at what would be really good alternative to CVs, those kind of things. People identified as executive best bets. Yep, Sophie. FTEs, pay scale. Yeah, interesting. Elise, agree. Lucy, great one for interviews, definitely. Where do you see yourself in 10 years time? Like, crikey, that's a really hard question. 5 years time, I'd get rid of those questions. So we've not struggled with that question. I thought about this, and actually you've come up with a much longer and better list than I came up with. Junior staff want career pathways. Okay, that's interesting. Whereas sometimes people feel like you're perhaps owed a career because perhaps you've put in lots of effort. I always get worried about career vulnerability for those people, because you feel like, well, back to that point about ownership, having a create, not wait mindset. So interesting for us to just think beyond what we talked about in this week's podcast. So this goes beyond the words that we use. Now I want to ask a question more for you personally. Thinking about these words, plans, steps, titles, destinations, and promotions, which is the one that you find hardest to let go of? Let me know using a star on the screen. So is it letting go of having a career plan? Maybe you're someone like me and you really like a plan. It really appeals to me. I like the structure and framework that a plan brings. Maybe it's this idea of it is about the next step. Maybe it's titles. So, maybe you just got really used to thinking about your job progression in terms of titles. Having a destination. This is what I'm aiming for. I want to be a CEO. I want to be a whatever it might be. Or going, I'm still pretty committed to promotion. Because I think it's also good. We've sort of gone very big picture, and now we go, well, what does this mean for me? How is this relevant for my role? Amal, that's interesting. Sometimes your context definitely influences this. We do find academic and education institutes generally are still quite ladder-like. So it's interesting. I do think some sectors are at different points in what we describe as the squiggly scale than others. So which is the one here you find hardest to let go of at the moment? Maybe it's promotion because that means more money. And you think, well, I sort of have to stay committed to the promotion one because I want to kind of increase how much I'm paid. That's interesting. That's interesting, Steve, as well. So actually talking about here about promotions because of the people are getting promoted, and you sort of go, well, there's not the openness. So then you sort of feel like, okay, well, I've got to try and buy into this game potentially and try and figure that out. And I do think at different points in your career, it's useful to know, well, which one feels hard to let go of, and to ask yourself why. Is it about you and your sort of internal preferences, like your personality? Or is it a bit about your context, which is more sort of what Steve and Amal are describing around going, maybe it's because of my organizational context, or maybe it's because of my industry sector. So for me, like, this is more of a personal one. Like, I love a plan. I am an organized person who likes to think things through. I'm very future facing. So I also quite like a destination. One of the things that I find quite hard about being an Amazing If is going, oh, it feels less like there's destinations. When you're in very big companies, you could always sort of look and see different destinations that you could sort of squiggle your way to. Whereas now I'm like, oh, so what does this mean? Like, oh, I'm running a company and I'd never anticipated doing that. So in some that's taken a bit of sort of letting go and sort of relearning. Well, if I'm going to let go of destination and I'm going to think direction, how do I know if I'm heading in the right direction for me? Like, that's kind of the question to ask here. This one was more one for me when I was younger, like earlier in my career. I think I saw titles around status and to do with sort of ego. And we know that instead of these, we want to aim for talents, skills and strengths. And actually, I find it encouraging and reassuring that lots of places now are talking a lot more about skills and strengths, transferable talents. Those things are kind of good news. Steps, we want to think moves or roles, just because I think steps limit our thinking. Steps, you can't help but think step up. We have a visual in our head of what a step looks like. And then I think, particularly in career conversations, we don't think creatively enough about where we could go and what we could do. So perhaps we're not as ambitious as we could be if we think about steps. And yet, promotion, we just want to broaden that to progression. So again, we want everyone to be really ambitious for where their career can take them. We believe that squiggly careers give you more opportunity, more potential, more possibilities. They feel more personal. And some of the time that might equal promotion. And that might be the thing that's most important, but it's not going to be all of the time. So I think it's just recognizing what progression means to you. Yeah, that's nice, Katie. Really nice reframe from Katie there. Sometimes steps can be helpful framing or maybe reframing in the context of small steps. Yeah, I mean, if you think about the sprint that we did in August, that's lots of small steps. That's lots of building blocks. So breaking things down, making things bite-sized, really helpful. If you're talking about small steps in the context of a big goal, very on board with that. Because if you've got a big goal, that can feel really daunting and overwhelming. So then going, well, how do we break that down into small steps we could take? Great, because they are actually steps that help to move us forward. If we talk about our career in terms of steps, then I think it becomes more problematic. Sam, that's interesting. Yeah, we haven't talked about things like maternity, paternity breaks. Lots of language can feel like it sets you back. Yeah, so perhaps you feel like going back on the ladder because you've had the word break, I'm not sure really accurately describes what happens during those times, depending on what you were doing. If you're traveling the world, perhaps it did feel like a break. But for lots of people, if you're caring for someone, if it's because you've not been well, if you've had kids, those sorts of things, like, probably not what I would describe as a break. Sorry, Claudia, yeah, my writing's not very clear. Next to steps, it says moves or roles. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of those here. So let's do the opposite now. What do you see and spot in your organisation from maybe some things that we do, from what you see elsewhere? What do you think helps with squiggly careers? What do you think helps to make squiggly stick? So we've talked about what doesn't help. We've talked about that ladder-like language. What are some of the alternatives? Strengths and values, great. And also this just could be ideas. So it doesn't even need to be things that you've sort of seen in practice. Yeah, psychological safety, really nice there from Carolina. Great. Psychological safety, I'm just going to summarize that in that way. Psychological safety, if you've not come across that before, that's we describe it as high trust teams. Psychological safety, pioneer of that, Amy Edmondson, who news just in, is coming back on the podcast. So she has a new book called Right Kind of Wrong. I think it's called that. I'll definitely know by next week. I've got to read it in the next week. And she's going to talk to us a bit about failure. I think it'll be a really interesting episode. She talks about the difference between basic failure and intelligent failure. Definitely a focus on strengths, a supportive manager. Yeah, managers make such a big difference. We've talked about it before, but I think they're the people that you often spend a fair bit of time with, you interact with day to day, often in lots of ways, being honest, more important than senior leaders, because they're the sort of people leading teams, in the day to day. So focus on strength, genuine learning opportunities. Yeah. Helping people to move internally. We talk about squiggle and stay. We see companies now that we're working with demonstrating some amazing examples of how they're helping people to squiggle and stay. We're going to share all those results really openly with everybody. So you'll see those over the next couple of months. Speaking to coaches, focus on impact. Yeah, really nice. So it's not about maybe outputs. So outputs would be I sent 20 emails today, or I did this presentation, I finished this presentation, but maybe more outcomes or impact. So what's the difference that you're making, you and your team? Valuing behaviors. Yeah, definitely. I'm actually doing that for Amazing If at the moment, writing some, we've got very clear values, but we've never really written down our behaviors. Really nice, Remy. Yeah, doing things that are fun. Yeah, you don't always have to, I'm very on board with the kind of, you don't always have to make a straight line link or a very obvious connection between what you're doing and how this is going to help us today. I think sometimes you do, but sometimes it's really good just to, we sometimes call them like random acts of curiosity. Something that's going to use your brain in a different way. Yeah, articulate business outcomes. And what does it, and your role in that? Yeah, connecting those dots, Kareem, brilliant, between what you do and sort of why it matters when you zoom out a bit, cross-functional teams and secondments. Yeah, Lisa, brilliant one. Having influential people. So we sometimes call these squiggly sponsors. It's one of the things that we see in organizations makes a really big difference. If you've got someone senior talking about Squiggly or your equivalent of that, then that sort of sets the tone for everybody else. And it has a real kind of ripple effect. So it shows that people are taking that seriously, that they've got a different perspective on what a career looks and feels like. Yeah, really nice, really good. Curious career conversations, brilliant. Great, loads of good examples there. So something a bit different that we didn't cover on the podcast this week, which I thought might be helpful, is having a go at a Squiggly success statement. Some of you might have done a version of this with us before, if you come to every single PodPlus, but I wanted to make this more specific to this year. So given we're sort of 3/4 of the way through the year, and when we think about success, I think often if we create for ourselves our own Squiggly success statement, it helps us to let go of some of that ladder-like thinking. It gives us the confidence and the clarity to go, oh, it's hard sometimes not to be drawn into promotion if I'm in a very promotion related environment, or it's hard not to be destination focused if I get asked those questions in interviews. But knowing the answer to this statement, or certainly your work in progress version, I think helps you to keep coming back to what's most important for you. So I'm just going to stop talking for, how long have we got? I'm going to stop talking for 3 minutes. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do this. And I'd just like you to scribble down on a bit of paper your answer to this question. A successful year is one where, I suppose I should have probably put I there, is one where I ... So what does a successful year for you look and feel like? So you're not thinking about what's happened so far this year. You're just thinking about a successful year, like what would be in that year. Write bullet points, do a mind map, write a paragraph, but try and write something down if you can, even if you've only got your phone in front of you. Get your notes section up, just write down some thoughts. I'm going to stop talking for 3 minutes, give you 3 minutes to really think about what does it mean to you, and then we'll talk about so what and what next. Okay, everybody, I'm just going to pause you wherever you've got to. I did that exercise too. It's really interesting, isn't it, what you write down and in what order. You can share it in chat if you'd like to. Nobody else can see the chat apart from us as a group, but don't feel like you have to. What I am more interested in is, how did it feel to do that exercise in the last 3 minutes? Have you got a really long list? Did it feel surprising? Was it tricky? Were you just warming up by the end of that 3 minutes? Interesting. Lots of people Steve, nice, flowed naturally. People talking about positive difference. Yeah, I had something along those lines. I'll talk to you a bit about some of the ones I had in a second. Yeah, lots of people talking about adding value, positive impact. It is where we get satisfaction and fulfillment from. We know one of the consistent sources, though success is very personal, we usually all feel good from helping other people. So feeling like you've had that kind of positive impact, usually on other people, is often something quite universal. Claudia, yours was long and you could keep going. Same. I think I talked a bit about like learning. I feel like I like to learn something new in a year. So some of my things felt quite specific, and then some of them felt more about kind of my life in general. Did people talk about all of their life, or did everyone just go work because it's a Thursday morning and maybe you're in work mode? Maybe, Rima, that's a really good question. Your success is personal things. Does that mean work is less important? It might do, in which case that's fine. Not everything always has equal importance at any one time or in a certain year even. So it might just be more about how your work-life fit works. Or it might just be that your work isn't quite giving you some of those things that make you feel successful. But also, just for some people, it's not as important as it is for others. I see that all of the time. One of the reasons we did the sprint in August was because we recognise not everybody wants to listen to a half-an-hour podcast about careers every week. But people might want to listen to a 7-minute one. Lisa, you work first initially and then you broadened. Yeah, I talked about things like, I can see the difference that I've made through the work that I do. I feel proud of ideas that I've had that have had a positive impact. Ideas are always really important to me. I did learn something new. I just wrote that as one statement. I think I just like to learn new stuff. And actually, I wrote something about feeling further forward this year than I did the year before, because I am very achievement orientated. So I could start to see my values coming through in what I was writing. And also my kind of favourite bit of career advice, never live the same year twice. Oh, new 4 ties, brilliant. Could you also start to spot some of your values perhaps in what you were writing? You might not have used the exact words, but I did use 2 of my 4 values. I actually used the exact words without thinking about it until afterwards. I looked and I was like, oh yeah, I can start to see my values showing up here. You've already found yourself thinking about this morning. Brilliant. Really good exercise just to keep coming back to. I think it helps to anchor you in what really matters to you. And it's just a quick exercise. And rather than just going, what's important to me in my squiggly career, which is a really big question, it's like, okay, well, what does a good year look and feel like? Corinne, there's no, the list should be this long. I think it's see where it takes you. And I would maybe have a go at this for a bit longer and just see what the longer list looks like versus the shorter list. And that also, again, might help you with, well, here's sort of there's a big difference between a wish list for a year and but if I had to prioritize, here are the 2 or 3 things that matter most. So you might end up with a bit of kind of ordering for yourself. One of the ideas that we've got that I wanted to leave you with today and just get some quick, fast feedback on, and we did talk about this briefly at the very end of the podcast, is writing some squiggly scripts for career conversations that happen frequently. And so I just wanted to get some feedback from you. If we were to create some squiggly scripts, not for you to follow exactly, but to support you in some of those moments that matter in our squiggly careers, what would you like a squiggly script on? So I've got 3 or 4 in mind that I think might be helpful. But like, what would you think? Okay, but do squiggly careers have something that I could look at just to give me an idea of how I might frame this conversation, or the questions I might ask, or something different? Asking for help. Interesting. I didn't have that one. Great. Yeah. Career conversations. We did have. Brilliant. Yeah. Promotion. Lovely. Interviews. Yeah. Kind of the classic one. I'm going to see whether the first one I had on my list, it hasn't come up yet, which is interesting. Difficult conversations I did have. Thank you for that one. Or maybe like difficult feedback I think I'd written. asking for more new opportunities, giving feedback. Aha, Lucy's got there in the end. The first one I had on the list was pay conversations. That's the one I get asked for the most, like how to ask for a pay rise. Asking, giving feedback, getting people in the boat with you. Interesting. Convincing. Oh, that's interesting. A squiggly script on Squiggly. Do you know what? I'd not gone there, Lisa, but I like it. Prioritization. And let me know, scale of 1 to 10, how useful can you imagine some squiggly scripts being for you? Scale of 1 to 10. Okay, 10 email. This is me just trying to get some fast feedback. Like, should we do this? Should we spend some time on this? Are people going to find it helpful? We wouldn't do all of them at the same time. We'd probably test 1 or 2, see how helpful they are. We'd put them on our free Squiggly Careers Toolkit on our website, and just get a bit of feedback. So interesting. This to me also is another way of bringing Squiggly to life. So if people approach career conversations using Squiggly framing, it would be useful. If you have feedback conversations where we're asking open questions, where we're asking before we tell, all the sorts of things that we would advocate week in, week out, I think that's how we start to see lots of Squiggly showing up in lots of different ways in organisations. So it's a small idea that we've got that we might just develop a little bit more in the next few months. But that's everything for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week is on highly sensitive people. So I don't know if any of you have read Highly Sensitive People, HSPs, I believe is the acronym. But Helen's read it and she interviewed the author yesterday. So that episode is out next week. So we'll be talking about that in PodPlus next week. And the week after, we're doing learning agility. I have gone a bit crazy on the learning agility podcast script. So either that's going to be a really long episode or Helen's going to need to do some very good editing before we record it, because I think it's a really, really big topic and a really important one, and one that I think everybody here will hopefully be super interested in. Thank you so much for joining on a Thursday morning. Always lovely to spend time with you, and thank you for all of your engagement, all your contributions today. You've all been brilliant, and I am going to be saving this chat because you've given us loads of super helpful insights. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening.